Hey there, welcome to the Standard Operating Procedure live broadcast. I'm Russell Lundberg, your host, and each week I try to show you tips, tricks, techniques, and tactics to help you love a career in telecom. Today, we've got part two of a two-part series lined up. I'm showing you my top 15 automation functions for your dashboards and reports. Last time, we went through about the first 10 functions and didn't have enough time to cover all of them. So I'm going to present the rest of them today, and I've added a couple more over the last week, ones that I'd forgotten. So let's stop sharing here, get me on the camera. Hey there. And let me spin up my workbook and get comfortable here. Excuse me. Right. Okay. So I'll need to share my screen again here. And I always share the whole thing. So Excel doesn't work very nicely if you don't share the whole screen. So, alrighty then. So here's the list of functions. And last week we did go through these first. We covered the first 12 up to quotient, and I said 12, but look at this. The first one I did was actually two functions, rows and columns. The second one was two functions, max and min. The third one was actually four functions, date, and you use another function for each of the three arguments, year, month, day. Text was a single function. Concatenate is one function, but there's also the ampersand operator. Remember that? We covered that. There's an ampersand. That's the ampersand operator. And then we did count and count A. Count is, of course, it only counts the number of cells having a number. Try that again. It returns the count of cells having a number in the argument, whereas count A returns the number of cells having anything in the argument. Any non-blank or non-null cell returns a value of 1. Then there's the if function, the and or function. So Vlookup and Hlookup. These days there's Xlookup, which is a little more flexible. It's more modern. Then we looked at index match, which generally are used together. And it's more flexible than the lookup functions. And I've also heard that it's more efficient. So if you have a large worksheet, a lot of data rows, and you're using index match, it might be a little faster than if you're looking at VLOOKUP. The flexibility comes from a lookup requires the first column or row of the lookup area, the lookup array, that has to be sorted. And index match doesn't have that requirement. So index match is good if you have a large array, many rows or many columns, and want to look up different rows or columns that have unique values. You can do that in one array, whereas with the lookup functions, you would have to duplicate the array and sort it by the column you were interested in. So index match is a little more flexible, a little more complicated, but it gives you that greater flexibility. Then we talked about mod, which is effectively the modulus operator, or the remainder after performing division. Quotient was similar, but quotient is the number of times the divisor will divide into the number. And today we're ready to get started. Well, how many was that though? That was 2, 4, 8, 9, 10. I'm going to call concatenate 11 and 12, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, and 23. So we've already covered 23 functions, 22 functions and one operator. So I'm going to keep going here today. Sorry about that. All righty then. we're going to cover the offset function. Offset is one of my favorites because it's really essential for automation. The way I always use offset is to dynamically define a range, a named range. So I'm going to show you 3 separate examples of using offset so you can see just how valuable it is to you. First, I'm going to use it to create a dynamic named range. We've covered this many times before, but it's so important. I really want you to get it. So I've got this data. I've imported data. This is actually the number of cases and new cases of the COVID virus last year. Well, from late March all the way to mid-August. So it's about 140 days worth of data. I'm just using it as an example. So a dynamic named range, we would go to the name manager. I use a Mac, Apple computer, and I shouldn't complain about this, but the implementation of all the Microsoft Office products on Mac is really broken. So what you see here is the name manager on Mac. If you use Windows, you get there's more data there. There's more control. It's better. This is just what I've got. Okay, so I'm going to define a named range, and I'll just call it cases. And we always start with the offset function. And I'm going to have to make sure I'm in the first row of data. So here's the row of data, is cell G2. 5 arguments for offset. The first one is just the starting point, or typically you can think of it's the upper left-hand corner of your data. Not always true, but as a general rule of thumb, good enough. So then it's the number of rows offset, the difference between your starting point and where you want to start. And for me, that's a 0. Same with columns, the number of rows offset, that's a 0. Now I want the number of rows of data, or think of it as the height. Yeah. And here's where we're going to do something clever. We defined the count function last time. So I'm going to do count because everything in column G, except the column label in row 1, in column G, they're all numbers. Remember, internally, Excel tracks dates as numbers, the number of days since January of 1900. So to Excel, all these dates are numbers. What we see on screen is just a formatted number. So I'm going to do a count on this row. Close the parenthesis. Can you hear me okay? Is everything okay for you? Hear me good? Okay. Let me know if you can't hear. I can see your chat messages. If you want to leave me a chat message, I'll be able to see that. And now I need the number of columns. Well, this is a very small array. I'm going to do an example later. Don't think that matters. So really, there's only 3 columns in my array: date, cases, and new cases. So let's just put a 3 there. That'll be okay for now. And I'm going to click plus, and now I've got cases. And I can always verify when I've created a dynamic named range is click on it in the name manager and then click on the definition. And you can see that Excel shows these flashing lights around the outside of it. And it goes exactly to the last row of data. Now, I always like this one because if we add new data, the range adjusts automatically. So watch this. I'm going to input new data. Remember, I defined the height of my named range based on column G. So if I add, let's say I had 225,000 new cases. Oh, oops. I can't have my name manager open with that. So 225,000. Let's say the previous number, what's going to be this one, plus 225, kind of a cheat. So now if I open up my name manager again, it'll show how it's dynamic. Here's cases. Remember, there's the See, the flashing lights doesn't include these new 2 data rows. Can't type now. Okay, so let me close that. And now do a date would be August 18. Now if I check my name manager, see, the flashing lights include the new data. So a dynamic named range will adjust automatically. And this is great for a dashboard or a recurring report where we periodically bring in new data. We want this dynamic named range to automatically adjust to include that new data. That's the first example. I use that with every, golly, almost every workbook, every dashboard, every report, I use that. Going to close that. Second example I wanted to show you was a rolling average. And from that same data, I've charted that. You can see I use the date as the horizontal axis and column I, new cases, as the vertical axis. But look out here, not so bad in the first few, part of the graph, but here in the latter part of the graph, the number of new cases jumps around so much, it's really hard to see the trend. Well, that's a good example to use a rolling average. And a rolling average is just is the average of the previous number of days. A lot of people would do that like this. Let's say a rolling average of 4 days, just as an example. And I would grab today and the previous 3 days, maybe. Yeah. And then close that. Right? But you can see right there, there's that error. It'll be omits adjacent cells. I ignored it, sorry. So, but if I go here, normally you want the range to mirror all your data, but you kind of get these. There we go. So now these are all a 4-day rolling average, but that's really not very flexible because maybe I thought a 4-day would be good. What if somebody else thought a 5-day rolling average would be good, or a 7-day rolling average? So it's not a good idea. Also, it's not good practice. What I've done is I've baked in a 4-day rolling average, but that's not a great idea. That's not a great idea. This is not right. Did I just do 3 days? I got lucky. This one's going to be looking at row 1, which it shouldn't. That's not a number there. But normally, here's how you'd work around that. One of the best practices in Excel is you want every formula all blocked together in a contiguous block. You want every formula to be the same. That way you don't get these error, the little green error in the corner. You don't get those errors. You don't want those errors. So first, I'm going to use offset to define a rolling average. And here's how I'm going to do that. This is just a formula so I can overtype it. And the average, the offset function is going to start here at today's data, right there, right? I'm not going to anchor that, but now I want an offset. So the offset's going to be, let's say it's a 4-day average. The offset is -4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's an offset of -4, comma, -4. That's the row offset. There is no column offset. I'll just do a 0. And then what's the height? Well, again, it's 4, right? A 4-day rolling average, and it's still only 1 column, right? Spill. I've never seen that before. So I said that the offset was -4, but I'd want the height to be -4 also. So let's put a minus sign there. Now, oh, what did I do wrong? I4, I didn't put a minus, I put a 1. So let's do a minus. What am I doing wrong here? My height offset is -4. I think it should still be right. Well, this happens sometimes. I14, I'm offsetting myself 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, see, it's trying to do 4 more. Okay, let's try. That won't work. Well, I'm stumped, guys. I14, and then my offset is -4 cells. Let's just do, I don't know what that means. Let's see what that means. I've never seen spill before. Did I do an offset? 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh. Okay. I understand. So what's happening is Excel is returning more than one value, and this is something I've seen only on the Mac. If I did it out here, it'll return 4 values, which is okay. I've never seen that on a Windows-based Excel, but really what I want is the range, these 4 cells that Excel is going to return. I'm going to feed that into the average function. So let's just wrap my offset into the average function and see if that's a little bit better. That is better, but now it's not, see, it's returning the same value as previously. So I think what I need to do is +1. Yeah. So I did want 4 rows offset, but I wanted to include today's value. So if I look at the average of these 4, it is 84,878, which is what I got. So instead of my X offset, my row offset of being -4, it's going to be -4, but then +1. I do that because I want to have the same value here, the -4 row offset and the 4 row height of my range. Let me show you why. Now that we've got that, I'm going to say, let's call that just number of days. This is the number of days in our average, and that's going to be 4. So let's make that a named range. Days average. And now let's just replace the 4 with that named range. And it was the 84 right here, yeah? So instead of -4, it's going to be days average. And then here's another 4. I know that's the days average. I get the same value, but now my average is based upon this value here. So let's go ahead and I'm just going to double click to fill down. There we go. So now that average is based upon here. Let's chart that and see what it looks like. Let's just let's just add that to my chart here already to save a little time. And I'm going to add a new one. And that's going to be rolling average. And here's my value. And I'll click, oh, and then I want the date. I don't absolutely have to have this, but I think it's a good practice because by default, it'll use the same one. We'll leave it like that. I think your best practice here would be to do this. So now you can see my rolling average. I can make that a little easier to see. See, the red doesn't jump around as much. It's a little cleaner. But watch this. This is a 4-day rolling average. Let's change that to 7. Now it's even better. How about 2 weeks? A 14-day rolling average? See, it really smooths out the curve a lot. But the real benefit to me is I haven't hard-coded a 4-day or 3-day or anything. I can change this on the fly, and I don't have to edit anything except the value in this field. There's the real benefit. So that's the second use of offset. The first one was a dynamic named range. The second one here is a rolling average. Honestly, I don't do that all that often, but when I do, it's really nice to have this flexibility. You know, the audience may say, they could, if it's my boss, he's going to disagree with me. He's going to say, not to use a 3-day average, we should use a 7-day average. Okay, I can just type it in and boom, it's there. I should say one more thing about this, just as a good practice, is that I don't like to have errors like this appear in my anywhere, right? Because especially when I know what the cause is, but to have them shown there, it doesn't hurt anything, but I think it just looks bad. So I would, since I know I'm going to get this, I could eliminate this. It's weird to me that with a 3-day average, 1, 2, I would have thought I'd got an error here because it's including a non-number. So that's weird to me, but we can fix that. We're just going to wrap this in an if function. If I want, so let me start over. So I've got 3 here. If I go to 2, I won't get an error. It goes away. So that means if I go to 3, row 2 will generate an error. If I go to 4, row 2 and 3. So if the row number, how about this? If this number minus the row number, here's row 2, is greater than 0, let's hide that. Let's try that. If there's my, didn't get it. If, here's my named range, minus how many rows? So it's rows. I'm in J2. Let's anchor that. Excel is greater than 0, comma, greater than, and I have to edit this. My boss in the office is getting tired of me complaining about how broken is Excel on the Mac. So now I don't get that error. So if the value of my named range minus my row count is greater than 0, hide it. So here, my row count is 2. My defined name is value 2. 2 minus 2 is 0. It doesn't do it. It just displays that. So now, as I increase this number, I'll get more blanks there, but that's just the formula hiding the errors. See that? So now I don't show any errors, and I have not hard-coded the number of days in my rolling average. There's one more thing I could do, and I think I should. Here's my number of days in the rolling average. Well, this just says rolling average. I think it should say how many days are in the rolling average. That way it'll display here. So let's edit this, and we'll make it a string, right? And that is my, let's use that named range, 13 and day. I'm not going to include the whole average. I'm going to say rolling average. So now it says 14-day average. It says 14-day average here. Actually, it says it in the title too, because I'm only showing the one value. But now as I change it, these changed automatically. This is what I mean when I talk about automation. This is fully automated. As I change this, I change my rolling average, but I don't get the errors, and it also changes these labels inside my chart. All good? So if you want to go to 14, that makes it a pretty smooth, relatively smooth graph. That's what rolling averages are often used for, is to iron out wild gyrations or changes in a data set. Okay? And then I wanted to show you one more thing. It comes up sometimes, and that is define a range based upon another range. Especially in a worksheet where you have a lot of named ranges defined, it can get a little confusing. So what was a good example? I think that's why I brought this one in. It wasn't really the reason. Okay, so if I've got this range, if I select it here, remember how we did this? I just click in the number of cases, and there's the range. What if I just wanted the dates, but I didn't want to create a new named range? An example would be, you ever use data validation? Data validation, one way I use data validation, if I want to pick from a list, right? So here I've got, all these dates. Maybe I want those dates to be in a pick list so the user could pick a date rather than manually typing it. Normally you do that with a data validation, a list function. So let's try that. Data validation. Can you see that okay? Data validation. And we're going to do a list. So let me give you an example of this. So there's 3 fruits, right there. And if I want to make a list, maybe I want to select, I use data validation, click here, data validation. I want to make a list, and I click here and then select the range. And now that's what appears in this pick list. So if I wanted to do something like that, how about instead of here, we'll go back to the data validation, and instead of column C, let's do all the dates. Now if I choose, look, I've got every date there. So this is a way to, it's easier for the user. They don't have to type. They can select it from the menu. But I've got a lot here in this case. It kind of, the real advantage to me though, is it constrains. They can't enter bad data. They can only enter data that I know is valid. So that's the reason you would do this. Data validation is what it's called. But I want to define this using the range. So I've got the range of cases, right? But that's actually 3 columns wide, which is what I want. So I want to use the offset function to get just a list of those dates using the cases named range as a starting point. So there's cases. I don't want a row offset and I don't want a column offset. And I want all the rows, the height is going to be all those dates, right? So I can just do a comma that defaults to whatever cases, however that's defined now, that height, my offset here is going to return the same height. What I do want to change though is cases, remember, was 3 columns. Well, I just want the first column. So I'm just going to make offset return 1 column wide, starting with the cases named range. And I got it. Now, let's say, for example, I wanted to use the 3rd column. Remember, the named range was all 3 columns. See, all 3 columns are highlighted there. So, for example, if I wanted to use the 3rd column, I'm going to, I can still use this, and I'm still going to do only 1 column, but I need a column offset. I don't want to display the 1st column, which is a 0 column offset. I want a 2 column offset, which is going to be, cases would be 1 column offset. New cases would be 2 column offset. So let's try that. Now it should give this, the new cases, which is meaningless, but I'm just showing the example. So 39,827,84837. So that works. So this is the 3rd use of offset. I have defined a new range based upon another range. Okay? That's handy sometimes because now I didn't add yet another named range to my name manager, right? So it keeps that less cluttered. Maybe I'll never use that again. If I do have to use this new name, this new range in another formula or some other situation, maybe I should make it a named range. But here it's just a data validation range. I'm not planning to use it anywhere else. So it's safe to define it the way I defined it and don't actually make it a named range. Okay, so that's it. That's plenty on offset. Offset is really, really useful. I use it all the time. I don't remember, nobody ever taught me this. I had to learn this, figure out myself or go on to Google for videos. It's a really handy tool for creating telecom dashboards. Okay, going to go to the next one now, and that's get pivot data. Got about 20 more minutes here. Going to have to hurry now. For get pivot data, I'm actually, I actually opened up this other worksheet because I've already got data in it. And I'm going to show you the data here. It's a named range. What's it called? Update LD data. See, and it's this column B to column G all the way down, all the data. It's same as what I just showed you, a defined named range that's dynamic, a dynamic named range. And here is the table that's defined. The data source uses LD data as its function, as its source of data. And then the way I use that is here, the get pivot data function. Click the way to, let's take a break here. Get pivot data simply grabs data from my pivot table, and you can put the get pivot data function wherever you want it. So the way to create that is pick a blank cell, enter an equal sign, and then click inside your pivot table. And here's what you have. I'm making it a little bigger so you can see it easier. So there's the get pivot data function. And automatically Excel is, depending on how the pivot table is defined, that's how Excel makes the get pivot data function. And in this case, I have in my columns area, I have a type, which is DLD or ILD. And in my rows area, I have the date. So both these appear inside my get pivot data function, the date and the type. What makes this valuable is I can replace this value with a reference. Let's get the date from this column. Oh, sorry, wrong one. Let's try that again. Let's get the date from this column here. And what that's doing is that's returning me the value for the DLD type on the date January 1, 2012. And it's 1,133,645. Let's go over and just check that for 1-1. The type is DLD. Right there it is. 1,133,645. DLD cost. Make sure that's what I had there. Sum of cost, type DLD, date J40, right? And I could do that differently. So here's sum of cost. Ooh, this is a gamble. That's not the right one. DLD, right? The other choice is ILD. So let's do this, ILD. And I'm going to anchor my date. So now if I drag it, sorry, and DLD I'm getting from the cell above, which is here, right? It's still 1,133,645. Now if I drag right, 039 is ILD. Yeah, there's column O, there's row 39. So now, and we can check it back here if you don't believe me. You don't believe me. There's sum of cost. Did that change? 1-1. Where's the 143? Yeah, it rounded up. 143,999. 142,999 is rounded to 143. And that's the real cool thing about the get pivot data function. It'll grab data from a pivot table and put it exactly where I want it. So let's go back and look at my dashboard. So here's the dashboard. And look at this. See the get pivot data? There, it's getting the date from B6. Here's column B, row 6. That's what all of these are, B6, B7, B8, B9. This is how I do automation, is I derive the dates. This is just from my lookup. Here's the last 12 months of dates, and that's what shows up in the dashboard right here. And now, as the dates change in my data, The latest date will show up here. There's the latest date. Sorry, there's the latest date. These values show me, based upon the latest date, show me the previous 12 months, which is what appears here in this column. And now this automatically shows me the value of MOU for the previous 12 months. And as the data change, it always does that. The date of the previous 12 months keeps changing so that the data changes. That's it. That's the get pivot data function. I use it all the time as well. Same with the offset. This is how you automate your dashboards and recurring reports. All right, what's the next one? If error and if NA. So let's come back here. Sorry. Have I used it here? This is a really mature dashboard. What you would do, though, is if there was data missing, if there's data missing, let's say, for example, I'm going to go here and change the date. Will it let me do that? I don't think it's going to let me do that. Okay, so this is the latest date. It's October of 16. What if, for example, it was November of 16? I don't have any data there. I come back here to my dashboard, I've got errors. The if error function is a great way to hide that. If, E-R-R-O-R, if error, two arguments to if error. The first argument is what you want to show, and the second argument is what you show if that first argument creates an error. So if error, if that's an error, if that creates a error function on screen, show nothing. So show nothing. And if I fill that down, it doesn't change these others because these others don't create an error. It's only an error right there. Only an error right there. So use if error. If is the if in a function works the same way. Some functions will, by default, if they have an error, return the ref argument, like get pivot data does that. Some functions, if they have an error, will return an NA argument, like your Vlookups, for example, would return an NA. If NA is a way to hide that. If the error, if you can anticipate the error, in this case, I can anticipate if I don't have data for that month, I can predict and take into consideration that potential error to hide it. Remember, I don't like to show those error functions in my dashboards and workbooks. I think that looks unprofessional. Okay, I'm going to back that out now because I don't want to. I didn't want to leave that changed because I might not have remembered what I did. Okay. Power. So power is something we use in models when you're compounding. Let's say I didn't do anything here, so I'm going to do power. So power, let's say that every month E7. So this is just a linear count. And let's say every other month, I want to, like compound interest, monthly compound interest. I could do that by inputting just whatever, if here's my interest, let's flag that so it makes sense for us, yeah. now I've got a name range called interest. Let's say now I've got a number and I want to compound interest. Okay, here's my number. Starts out as 100. So now didn't quite work the way I expected it to. Power E11. Number power. So the way you use power is you don't want to have to, if I simply did this, didn't prepare ahead of time, so I'm not. Let me pull up a previous model I did where I showed modeling best practices. Nope, it's before then. Modeling. Complete model. Okay, I use, here you can see the power function. That's what it is. Okay, so what I've got here is I want to raise a number. I want to multiply a number, MRC, times compounding. Compounding means the first time I would just multiply it times that increase, right? But the second time it would be the power function. So L5 is going to be up here. Yeah, L5. Yep. So the first time I apply this, it's going to be my balance, right, times, here's where I do the power function. So now with the power function, let me I always got to practice these in advance. And I keep hitting the wrong button. Okay, there's my power function where I'm applying the power. Here's my balance is 100. And now I've raised it to this power. The interest rate, power of 1 plus the interest rate raised to the first power. So there's 107. But if I did it, if I hard coded it, I'd have I'm trying to think how you would normally do this if you're writing as an Excel formula. Here, if I just drag it right, it's going to continue to get the power from here, right? So equals this plus, times 1 plus this. Right? But here it would now be times 2. It'd be this plus here. And so on. Using power makes this really easy, though. Every time you add another, you just increase the power. The power function is really good for models because you do this often. Yeah. So in this case, I don't want to go into all that. I haven't practiced that. That's the power function. And that helps in your models. Here's the model that I did several weeks ago. And it's tied. You can see it's tied to my L5. L5 changes every 12 months. So here's the first 12 months. And on the 13th month, it changes. So that's using the quotient function. Okay, what do we have next? Week num. This is sometimes the data we track will vary by day, by week, by month, by quarter. And if you've done a good job at separating the raw data from all your activities, you can generate multiple reports from that data. Let's come back to offset. So the way I'm going to do this, so there's the date. That's 1 per day. So here's how I could use week num. Here's the date, H2, and then you get a choice here. So you can see now I could make a weekly report. Here's daily data, but I would use this week num in a pivot table, for example. If I change my pivot table, I'd have to change my named range first, because remember, this named range is only the 3 columns. That's cases, just the 3 columns. So let's change it to start on G. And now if I insert a pivot table using cases, what the hell? Excel. I just want out now. There's cases. What the hell? Excel. See, Excel. No, that was me. It wasn't Excel. So now let's insert that. I typed in a column GH instead of just G. So now I can insert a pivot table, and it's cases. And I can put my week num so I always have to do this in advance. Cases doesn't include the row header. I can do that though by starting at -1, my row offset. But I have to be careful because my count now needs 1 less row. So now if I refresh this, here's my week num. And maybe I want the new cases, the average of new cases. So that's all I did. Here's a day at a time, which I could chart, have charted. Here is a week at a time. For the heck, I don't even need to do that, do I? I could make that the sum of new cases per week. And I could chart that, right? So one set of data, daily data, I can make it 2 reports, a daily report, a weekly report. I could also make it a monthly report, same thing. Now you want to pull the year, month, and day out of your data. So there's year is I2, month, I2. And let's say to make it a monthly report, I want to always use the first day of the month as my anchor point for. So now this is all. There's March, and then the date changes. So now here's all your April data. Down here, it changes to May data right there on May 1st. So now I could have a see, I added this, but the new cases is gone. So once again, the workaround here is when you define a named range at the beginning, don't hard code how many columns it has. See, this was hard coded at 3 columns. I'm now cases and new cases. I should add 2 new columns. Yeah, very good. I could also add my 21-day average, the average column. So here's that week num. What if I did, I could create another pivot table. Oh, that's sorry, wrong one. Months. Now by default, Excel on a Mac anyway, wants to group. It's grouped my dates. I don't want to group. So I would just come here and do ungroup. Where's grouping? Group selection, ungroup. Now I get my months. And I could do my new cases. Again, that would be sum of new cases by month. Okay? Sum of new cases by month. Looks pretty bad. Okay, what's next? We're just about out of time here. We're right at noon. Is blank and is in A. These are two functions where, once again, I use to hide errors. So if you've got a long list of data, let's take a look at that. Offset data. Let's say I wanted to make a month column. How we did that, remember, we just did the add the year, month as arguments to date, D2, and then just hard-coded the first of the month. Oops. So it'll automatically fill that down. What happens down here? Well, 1100, that's goofy. So what I would tend to do is, if the date column was blank, oh, nothing. It's blank D2. Oh, sorry, if it's blank D28. Yeah, so now I can fill that. And it hides that unsightly. And I tend to mark my formulas with a purple, just so I'll know they're there, because sometimes they're hidden, so I mark it. Also, that tells me how far down I'm filled. Okay, that's is blank is in A. We talked about that on the get pivot data function. If a function, it will return an error, you can automatically anticipate that. See, NPV, this is another one I use for a model. And NPV, we could do a whole episode on NPV. NPV is how you calculate the overall value of a project or a business case that has several different types of costs in it: recurring costs and fixed costs, one-time costs, variable costs. They can extend far into the future. NPV, that stands for net present value, is simply a way to quantify what the value of all those costs is as they extend into the future. NPV is a way to determine what's the value today. So you can calculate the value of all those different fixed and variable and recurring and one-time costs into one number. So here's the NPV. This is a cost that goes out. Where's my term? 36 months. So you can see here, I've got all these costs. Right, here's every month's cost. Excuse me. Excuse me, I sneezed. NPV is a way to group all of these costs extending far into the future in one number. So the way you'd use it is, if you had, there's only two values to it, is The first value is, it's the interest rate, and it's most finance people would call it the cost of money. And the other value is the term. What are those costs over however long? What is the term? It's an array or a range of all the different costs that you're going to include. So NPV simply takes all those future costs and groups them into one number so that you can compare two different projects. Like, for example, the example I gave in one of my lessons was, let's say you want to compare the one-time cost of a 10 gigabit per second leased circuit, and you've got two providers, and they've got different monthly recurring prices that they charge you, and they have different escalations built in, or they have different one-time costs. Maybe there's fixed recurring costs in addition to like a variable usage cost. Maybe it's burstable or not burstable. All these different costs that will be applied over the term of this leased circuit. You can use net present value to get these two service providers distilled down into a number from each one, and you can just compare that one number. It simplifies our job a lot by giving you one number. Okay, we've gone over it. That's enough for today. Thanks so much for being with me. Glad you appreciate it. We'll see you again next week on the Standard Operating Procedure IntelliFi live broadcast. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.